Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, Profiler here, and welcome. Welcome to our continuing series on the Golden State Killer, the beginning of the In series. And I have to mention, as in all other series, everybody is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Although I think that's going to be a little hard today because we're going to be talking about Israel Keys, and Israel Keys is dead. He killed himself, so he's not going to be ending up in a court of law. However, there's a lot of evidence that Israel Keys is a major sexual predator and killer. What we're focusing on today is trying to match up Israel Keys versus Golden State Killer. And this is based on the feedback we've been getting from you guys out there. Our audience is very important to us. And what you guys are interested in hearing about and seeing is very important to us. So we're matching up Israel Keys versus the Golden State Killer. And we're going to see what we come up with on who we feel was much more intelligent and who was smarter. For instance, when we start off, we have to take a look at Israel Keys and the Golden State Killers both being sexual psychopaths. I mean, that's just the way it goes. These guys were. They enjoyed seeing their victims in fear. Israel Keys enjoyed seeing the fear in his victim's face until he tortured them and he killed them. If you take a look at GSK, the Golden State Killer, exactly the same thing. He really tried to induce fear in his victim before he raped them, and then later on before he raped and killed them. So both of them are very similar in that arena. The second thing that's very interesting to me is how extremely organized both of them were. We're looking at Israeli Keys being extremely organized and focused on national travel. Pretty much, Israel Keys got away with it, got away with his murders and his looting and plundering for many years because he did not stay local. He traveled nationally to commit his crimes. And that's why he got away with it for a very, very long time. Whereas with the Golden State Killer, pretty much local guy, and of course we have him moving around the state. But we don't have him in the national arena. So that's a difference. The Golden State Killer was more local with his stalking and his trolling and his killing and his plundering versus Israel Keys being more national and very hard to get a beat on when he's committing crimes in other states and then flying right out of town. You know, like a stranger on stranger murder. Hardest crimes in the world to solve. Any law enforcement agent, any detective will tell you that. And the other thing we're looking at, both of them were thieves and murderers. I mean, Israel Keys focused on robbing banks in a lot of the areas that he traveled to, along with stalking and hunting humans and sexually abusing men and women. Whereas Golden State Killer pretty much was local, but he was also a thief and a robber and was very focused more on the sexual bondage and the murder of his victims. Keys was involved in bondage as well. There's some theories out there, and they're probably true, that Keys was a necrophiliac and liked to spend time with the dead after he killed them. We do not believe the Golden State Killer did. However, what was he doing after his victims were dead and he was marching around their house, eating and drinking and spending time before he would leave? We know that the vast majority of victims that the Golden State Killer had, he did not kill. On the other hand, we know the majority of victims that Israeli Keys had, he definitely killed them. I mean, he pretty much took them out right away. He did not want any witnesses talking. So I think there's, a little bit of a difference there. The other thing I'm focused on is the ritualistic sexual murder. Both of them were very similar with the ritual that they would perform. I mean, Keyes has his ritual where he would fly out of town, find a couple, move on their house, tie them up. Then he would torture them, tell them what he was going to do to them. And then supposedly he sexually abused the man and the woman and then killed them. Then he would put an awful lot of work into the body disposal and getting rid of their bodies. In fact, Israel Keyes' bodies, except for maybe one, I think it is, really have never been found. I mean, this guy worked hard at getting rid of his bodies. I mean, his motto was definitely out of sight, out of mind. I mean, he went through a lot of hard work to dispose of his bodies. Whereas the Golden State Killer, I mean, he left his victims where he found them, pretty much in their house, except for the ones he chased or chased him and then he shot and killed. But pretty much the Golden State Killer, not realizing back in the day about DNA, pretty much kept his victims in the house and left them in the house. They were bound, same as Israel Keyes, but they were not removed from the crime scene. They were left at the crime scene. And he got away with it for many, as we know, decades before he ended up getting caught. How many victims the Golden State Killer has out there, we really don't know. But pretty much their ritualistic pattern was extremely similar. Both of them were into binding, both of them were into torturing, and both of them in the end, well, GSK in the end anyway, was into murder. Both of them were very sadistic sexual predators. Again, we have Keyes being national, Golden State Killer being more local. Another word on organizational skills. When you look at Israel Keyes, he would fly into an area and then he would build his kill kit. He would put it together and put it in an airtight container and he would bury it under the ground. And he would leave it there for maybe a year, 2 years, even longer, until he was ready to come back to that area, do the deed, stalk and hunt some couple for sexual gratification, and probably ended up robbing a bank or two on that trip. When you look at the Golden State Killer, his focus was on bringing his kill kit with him. He brought his flashlight, he brought his gun, his knife, and his bindings. And pretty much after he did the deed, he left with his gun, his knife, his flashlight, and towards the end his bindings. In the beginning he left the bindings, but in the end he knew they were becoming evidence, and more he decided to take them with him. And I think that was to throw authorities off, not to let authorities see that diamond knot, so they would think it was somebody else that was working down south and not up north. But anyway, that's what you're looking at as far as organizational skills go. As far as body disposal goes, we have to look at both of these guys because they're very different. With Israel Keyes, his focus is on out of sight, out of mind, and pretty much he's focused on burying his bodies and putting them under the ground where nobody can see them, nobody knows where they're at except him, or else he puts them in a watery grave. He deposits them in a very deep lake. Dismembers the bodies and weighs them down and drops them in a very deep lake. Very hard to find bodies when they're disposed of in this manner. So Israel Keyes is not scared of working hard to dispose of a body. It doesn't bother him at all. Now, when we look at the Golden State Killer, he doesn't have to go through all this physical work. Don't forget, these are different times. Different times call for different situations, which call for different behavior. So the Golden State Killer, he doesn't know anything about DNA back in these days. So it's not even a thought in his mind. Israel Keyes did know about DNA back in the 90s. But early on, in the 70s, 80s, the Golden State Killer didn't think about DNA. He thought about fingerprints. He wore gloves. He thought about being recognized or identified. He wore a mask. And he wasn't worried about body disposal. He wasn't worried about transporting a body somewhere to bury it or to throw it into a lake. He only cared about getting away from the scene, getting away from the crime scene. And he did that very, very well. He had unbelievable escape and evade techniques, I must say. But he wasn't worried about anybody tying him to the bodies because it was stranger on stranger murders. Being a cop, he would have known those are the hardest cases to solve. So he didn't have to put the effort into it that Israel Keyes did. The only thing he left at the scene, which was eventually his undoing, was his DNA. But who would have thought back then? No one. So we have differences in the body disposal rituals, if you will, of these two different serial killers. Both extremely smart with their MOs. And the next thing we're looking at is the mistakes they made and what led to their undoing. With Israel Keyes, he broke the number one rule of his ritual. Trying to abduct somebody locally. Trying to sexually abuse them, terrify them, eventually strangle and kill them, and then to even go further to try and use them to get a ransom. And that's what happened when he grabbed that young barista from her coffee stand. When he took her and held her for ransom, after he murdered her, that was his undoing. That's when he broke his number one rule. Because now he was in a local game. He wanted the ransom money deposited in her ATM account. It was. And now he had to go figure out how to get that money out of her ATM account. Yeah, he was pretty smart in killing her and then thinking of the ransom afterwards and propping her up and sending her parents a picture and demanding a ransom and getting it deposited in her account. But man, oh man, I mean, that sets up an electronic trail. And I don't think he really thought about that. And that's what led to his undoing. Bottom line, what led to his undoing was him breaking his number one rule because he was not disciplined enough. He was not disciplined enough to realize the consequences of his actions and what could happen. When he saw that barista and he got that urge to sexually dominate and control her, nothing else mattered. And all the discipline and his rules and his ritual went out the window, and he grabbed her and he abducted her and did what he did with her. And that was the major mistake to his unraveling. Whereas with the Golden State Killer, if you followed him, you know that he was extremely disciplined and did not break his ritual. He was so disciplined that all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed. And the only way that he ended up getting caught was because of something that wasn't even a thought or really even known of. And don't forget, he was in law enforcement back in the day. Nothing was ever known back then, or rarely known, about DNA and where it would progress to over the years. So for 40 years, the Golden State Killer was able to evade capture and evade law enforcement because of his discipline and not breaking his ritualistic murders and assaults. That's the difference between Israel Keys and the Golden State Killer. Israel Keys succumbed to his sexual cravings, where the Golden State Killer, as far as we know, did not and was able to continue to follow his discipline. You know, the way we look at this case, the way I look at this case, both of them were pretty smart serial killers. But I have to tell you, we've heard there's approximately 8 murders or more out there with Israel Keys. I don't know. Because I'm looking at a guy that goes into town and he's not flying all that way just to murder. He's robbing a bank too. He's got money on his mind as well. And then I look at the Golden State Killer and I look at 12 we knew of. He just got a new one charged on, so we've got 13 that we know of. We've got over 55 rapes. We've got all these burglaries. And he was able to evade law enforcement for over 40 years. It was only because of technology and great police work that brought this guy down. I mean, he was, in his mind, scot-free for many years, I'm sure. So what I have to say is the Golden State Killer was much smarter and more intelligent than Israel Keys. And the reason for that, he was able to continue his discipline and not break his ritual. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. We'll continue to do these as they come up, as you request them. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Please continue to subscribe. We really appreciate your support, and keep it safe out there.